you're a girl from Compton, don't just become a tennis player. Become the greatest athlete ever.
Money's gotta be the shoes. Shoes. You sure it's not the shoes?
I'm sure, Morris.
Nike is an iconic company for many reasons. And in 2020, it made nearly $3 billion in U.S. profits. They did great during this pandemic. Digital sales almost doubled. The company says they beat a, quote, dynamic environment by staying on the offense, as CEO John Donahoe put it. Now, Mr. Donahoe took over running Nike after a successful stint at Bain Capital, where he worked with Mitt Romney. And he oversees a Nike workforce where the median employee makes about $490 a week, or $25,000 a year. To put that in perspective, it means a single parent of 3 kids with the median Nike salaries living below the poverty line. Half of Nike's employees make less than that, meaning many of them might work and still need assistance to get by, like those food lines I mentioned, whether it's from a charity or a second job or government subsidies. As for CEO Donahoe, very different story. He makes over 500 times the salary of his median employee. And in what he called that, quote, dynamic year of 2020, his overall compensation was $53 million. This is mounting inequality in pandemic America. And while Nike benefits enormously from the U.S. government, with regulating the markets, systems, the mail that ensures Nike's profitable, that the products go out, company's not paying its share at all. In that same dynamic year of 2020, Nike paid 0 federal taxes. None. Which is wild. A company making billions and paying its CEO millions is paying our government less than a single average taxpayer, probably less than you. So where are all those Nike profits going? Well, to paraphrase some Rick Ross lines about the company's product, count the profits, you could bring them in a Nike box. Grinding in my Jordans, kick them off, they might be hot. Ross is saying his own Nikes might be stolen or hot, and his illicit profits can be stored in a Nike box. But when it comes to Nike's tax money, that shoebox would be empty. That's not fair to everyone else paying taxes. Now, for its part, Nike says it follows the law and has paid, quote, significant taxes over the years. But my point here with you tonight is not even to single out Nike as some sort of special case or outlier. It's actually the opposite. What Nike does is common. It's usually legal, which raises questions about whether any of this should be legal. 55 U.S. companies paid 0 federal taxes on 2020 revenue, with other big names in that same crew like FedEx and Dish, and companies that have had their businesses surge as customers face limited options while quarantining under government rules. These very figures are facts Biden cited in that big speech to Congress.
Recent study shows that 55 of the nation's biggest corporations paid 0 federal tax last year. Those 55 corporations made in excess of $40 billion in profit. A lot of companies also evade taxes through tax havens in Switzerland and Bermuda, and they benefit from tax loopholes and deductions. It's not right.
It's a huge problem. With customers hurting and corporate taxes hitting an effective rate of 0, you could imagine business leaders treading carefully here, but instead many are demanding that whatever the U.S. does next, corporate taxes shouldn't go up at all. Now, economists debate all kinds of things. There aren't always simple answers, but here's one thing we do know. Corporations pay less right now because Trump slashed their rates by about 40% as soon as he got into office, moving over $1 trillion off their corporate balance sheet. So that bill goes somewhere else. It goes to workers or some other part of the system. Trump even told his millionaire donors that all his tax reforms would help them. And he was blunt about how this was a wild perk for corporations.
Corporations are literally going wild over this. I think even beyond my expectations. The biggest tax cut, biggest reform of all time.
Going back to just before the aberration of the Trump presidency, corporations paid a tax rate above 30%. If you go back to the 50s and 60s, many paid half their profits in taxes, which financed roads and schools and the military. But that norm has been slashed over time, the corporate rate falling all the way down to this Trump rate of 21%. Now, this change was led by Republicans and some Democrats supporting deregulation. It's also interesting to note the top Democratic leader back in the day warned the Republican tax crusade would not magically save money. It would cost so much that surplus money for the elderly and health care would be raided.
It will use Social Security and Medicare surpluses. It will create the same deficit situation, I promise you, as we have seen all through the 1980s and early 90s.
As corporate rates crash, these are, of course, maximum possible rates. After Trump's plan passed, the number of companies paying zero doubled. And many companies managed to pay less than the 21%, as Biden was talking about, or they pay zero, with gimmicks and ploys and lawyer tricks, many of which are deemed legal. Now, some have a financial purpose, like honestly declaring your losses. Others, though, are tricks designed for tax dodging, like moving shell companies abroad to get lower foreign rates, while you benefit from America's rules, an issue many top Democrats have hammered.
If anybody here thinks that corporate America gives one damn about the average American worker, you're mistaken.
Companies like Facebook have kept billions of dollars in tax breaks through tactics like offshore tax evasion.
You built something great in this country, good for you. But you did it using workers all of us help pay to educate.
If they can save 5 cents by going to China, that's exactly what they would do.
Pitch in 2 cents so everybody else gets a chance.
Unlike my opponent, I will not let oil companies collect another $4 billion in corporate welfare from our taxpayers. We've got a better path.
So why is this in the news now? Democrats are pushing to fund this new infrastructure bill by reforming corporate tax inequity. They want to nudge the corporate tax rates up a bit. Biden pushing for a rate of back to 28%. And I can tell you tonight, most voters already support that. Some moderate Democrats, though, are saying it shouldn't even go back up to pre-Trump levels, arguing for a middle ground, they call it, of 25%. But here's the thing. This entire debate is still happening right now within the narrow corporate terms set basically by Trump, which came after decades of corporate giveaways. In the 80s, it was considered a conservative Wall Street victory when Reagan slashed those corporate rates from 46 to 34%, in a sweeping law that many Democrats and then Senator Biden supported. This was back in the days of an often bipartisan attack on taxes.
The American taxpayers must either bail it out or someone else will come in and buy it out. When I argued that we should freeze federal spending, I meant Social Security as well. I meant Medicare and Medicaid. I meant veterans benefits. I meant every single solitary thing in the government. The liberals in my party said it's an awful thing you're doing, Joe. If we had not had the Reagan budgets that we all voted on, I mean, we could have stopped them. We would have a budget in balance right now. And the debt that's occurred is a consequence of those Reagan additional deficits. I shouldn't say Reagan, the Reagan and the Democratic Congress, both.
Facts. Reagan and Democrats and then Senator Biden backed those Reagan rates, bringing corporate taxes down to 34%. And remember, this is why this is so important right now. At the time, Wall Street cheered that as a big victory and a low rate. Here we are decades later in a pandemic recession where the government has been literally cutting these corporations new checks and very favorable loans and vaccinating their workers and propping up the economy. And Washington's entire frame of reference is whether to keep the Trump tax rates in that 20% range or bump them a bit. It's literally this narrow. Most of Congress isn't even looking at going up to those Reagan rates of 34%. And Biden, to be clear, has changed his tax approach for a new world. He used that big speech to make the case for reforming these corporate taxes.
We're going to reform corporate taxes so they pay their fair share and help pay for the public investments their businesses will benefit from as well.
Now, when you see the billionaires who run Nike and Amazon and these big companies thriving while people are suffering, if you remember nothing else from this walk down tax lane, remember this. The billions they have while people wait in line for food, that's not just the way the economy works. This is the way Congress works. It's the way politicians lock in gains for Wall Street donors who've been demanding that each new administration treat whatever past corporate welfare they got as the baseline, untouchable for any new plans. And it doesn't happen by accident. Amazon gave $12 million in political contributions just last cycle. They did it to get something. Same for Bain Capital that I mentioned. They gave $21 million. or those big financial firms like Blackstone and Citadel, they each gave over $40 million, making them among the top 10 companies for highest political donations in the whole country. They keep setting the terms with Congress. Republican administrations often lock them in. These companies, though, have found that it's basically cheaper to lobby Congress up front and then avoid paying sometimes any taxes later. So here we are now, with even a blue wave election that handed the Senate and the White House to Democrats. But the actual D.C. boundaries for corporations seem to still be choosing between the Trump-era tax cuts or the Reagan-era tax rates, and not much else. Corporations have narrowed the terms of this debate at this important time. Congress largely obliges. And then you have, as I mentioned, some, not all, but some Democratic senators saying that even ending the entire Trump tax cuts would be too much. When a blue nation and a blue government are stuck debating on terms set by Trump and Reagan, something is seriously off. And you'll notice, by contrast, debates over social issues aren't caught this far in the past. But this one comes all the way down to the money. And America has to ultimately decide, even beyond going back and forth between parties in these elections, at a structural level. America has to decide if it can stick with a tax and campaign finance system that is this unequal. And yes, this expensive. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.